So first things first, how are you?
Doing great.
Good to hear. So before we get into the new record, I'd like to start at the beginning. Do you remember the first song you ever wrote?
I do. I think I was like 4 years old and I was riding a little bike around our kitchen. We had like an island and I was just riding around endlessly. And I think I was saying, "Don't go away, please don't go away."
Were you singing it about someone?
No, I don't think I had anybody to sing about at that point, but I just remember writing that.
Okay.
That was my hit at the time.
And the people around you all were quite musical, so was
Yeah.
it kind of a given that you
Yeah,
venture down
definitely.
that path?
Yeah, I think my mom had been writing songs, so I was really just trying to emulate her at that point. I was like, I got a song for you, Mom.
What was it about your mother singing that you liked?
What about my mother singing? I mean, it's always very soothing when your mother sings to you as a child. And she was very artistic. She was a very interesting lady, so she didn't sing like other mothers.
Okay.
She's different.
And so this is very early, 4 years old.
Yeah.
When did music start to kind of become a prominent part of your life?
I think 12, about 12 years old. I think up until that point, I was playing a little piano and singing and doing as much experimenting as I could on the guitar. I couldn't really play it that well, so sometimes I would just stick pencils in it and pretend I could play it. But it's around 12 that I really started to get into the guitar and kind of write my own chord changes and realized that I was pretty obsessed with music in general. So,
What did writing music, writing thoughts down onto paper do to you? What kind of...
I think at that point, I just knew music was this wild vehicle for emotions. And I remember certain songs on the radio just gave me this really incomprehensible feeling. And the same with like movie soundtracks where I was just completely overwhelmed by the sound. And so I think from a very early age, I was writing more for the melodies and less about lyrics and more about, the moods and trying to create something emotionally overwhelming with just chord changes.
That's interesting, because we'll get into the movie a little bit later, but what was your favorite soundtrack growing up?
Oh man. The Titanic soundtrack. A lot. The Romeo and Juliet soundtrack was really incredible. Kids in the Hall Brain Candy soundtrack had some deep cuts. The Wedding Singer soundtrack had some deep cuts. And then just older stuff like Alfred Hitchcock movies and things like that. And Judy Garland, Wizard of Oz.
What I find interesting about film scores is they tend to kind of portray the atmosphere of certain, like you say, emotions. So when did you figure out that you can use melody, use music to convey emotions to other people?
Well, yeah, I think right around that time when I started learning how to play instruments a little better, I think I got to the point with piano where I could play some Beethoven, and I always felt like Beethoven was just so emotional, and I wanted to write a movie just to have Beethoven's music in it. So I think that was a very early realization for me.
Did you write a makeshift movie?
Write a movie?
Yeah.
I wanted to do a movie using Beethoven's second, and it would be the real story of the Little Mermaid, where she dies. Because in the true old fable, she turns into foam. She sacrifices herself so the prince could be with a human being. And I was really bummed that they never put that in the Disney version.
They censored it.
They censored it, and it's so much more beautiful when she just turns into foam and Beethoven comes on, and
When did you realize that finding a path in music was a viable option?
Oh man, it was never a viable option. I don't think it ever is, but I realized at a certain point that it's all I really wanted to do, and it's all I could do. And I think that was around like 14. It was kind of like this is what I do. But I wouldn't say that it ever was viable. I think that my folks and people around me definitely weren't like, yeah, you got it, go get it. You know, like even my choir teacher, even people that knew that I had some semblance of musical talent weren't like, you need to, you know, hone in on this. I think nobody knew that I was going to take it this far.
Did you know?
I mean, I knew because I knew because I was pretty convinced, but I think that I've gone through different phases of being more or less convinced. And in the end, it was just determination and belief, you know, that kept me going.
So with that in mind then, what was your mindset right around maybe 2 years ago, kind of thinking about where to go with the new album?
Where was my mindset 2 years ago?
Kind of around the time that you started this new album cycle.
Yeah, I think that going into writing this album, I felt so lucky and so grateful that I'd finally been afforded the opportunity to work with a lot of people I wanted to work with and have a lot of time in one studio to kind of create a very generative kind of volcanic musical environment where we were bringing a lot of people in to play, string players, you know, working with reel-to-reel tape machines and just experimenting and spending whole days on soundscapes and just kind of being, you know, afforded the resources to do something like that was completely new. I'm so used to kind of bedroom recording or like going into a studio for one day and trying to do a million things or recording in like a garage or something. So I think that, yeah, it was just very, for the first time, exploratory in a really free sense.
So you were able to expand on the sound that you kind of had in your mind.
Yeah, definitely. Able to make the sounds in my head a reality.
Because I can imagine if you go to the first 3 albums, were the songs that you conjured up in your mind, were they already kind of the way they are now on this new record?
Like when I first wrote them?
Well, I mean, previous records. Did you think out those songs and kind of, or did you hear them in more expansive?
Yeah, I think a lot of those songs I had been playing live for a long time, so I knew what they should be like, and I had like pretty, you know, pretty clear ideas about the arrangements. I think this most recent record that I just finished has been the most kind of exploring in the studio than ever before, and kind of discovering new things. And in the past, it was kind of like, I hear this one thing and I hear this thing and that's it, you know.
Is that a result then of being able to explore more, being able to,
yeah.
like you mentioned, or is it kind of, did you always wanted to but didn't have the kind of...
I think I always wanted to, but I didn't really have the time or the resources or the confidence.
How come? The confidence, especially the confidence, how come?
I think because at that point, I was not viable. And
to yourself?
To the world. It takes a while to earn your keep in music. And I didn't really have any real vocation that would make it so I could afford rent on a studio or like my own space or kind of accumulate gear. I think when I was very young, I had like a brief moment where I had my own studio and I had accumulated a bunch of analog gear, and I was definitely like doing a lot of exploration, but it was so short-lived because of, you know, my lifestyle and not really being able to afford it. So.
Right. What was the first song that kind of started this whole process?
The whole album?
Maybe there wasn't one key song.
A lot's going to change, actually. The first song. That was the first thing that I wrote, and I knew that it was kind of like a new level for me in terms of kind of hearkening back to some of my favorite older composers and songwriters, like Gershwin or Hoagie Carmichael or something. I was like finally figuring out how to play those chords painstakingly on the piano, and I spent a lot of time laboring kind of in that zone and trying to figure out how to write a true classic song, which I don't think I had accomplished up until that point.
That's an interesting point you make, because can I assume that then that you continuously challenge yourself in terms of your abilities and kind of where you want to go? Because being able to play the piano and kind of growing with each album, that requires determination.
Yeah, no, I'm always trying to go to the next level, and I'm never satisfied, and I want to continue to grow. And I can never give myself like a pat on the back, you know. I kind of want to keep growing and keep trying new things always.
And then the sound kind of, you have that first song. Where do you go from there? Does that become then a blueprint of kind of, because the other songs don't necessarily sound like that song? So
Yeah. I think that first song is just an introduction into the whole conceptual theme of the album. You know, a lot's going to change. A lot has changed since people were writing songs that sounded like that, you know?
Well, that's two things then. A lot of things change. So did a lot change? Well, we talked about it a little bit, changes between the albums where all of a sudden you had the resource and you were able to kind of expand on what you were doing. But in your life, did a lot of things change from those two albums?
Definitely, yeah. And a lot has changed. Really what that song is about is kind of how much has changed since my childhood. And it's kind of sung from the perspective of me as an older person singing to myself as a younger woman. And a lot psychologically and social, like macro social level with climate change and, you know, so many things I couldn't conceive of happened. And I think that those changes really accelerated in the last, 3 years, especially in America. I mean, when I put my record out, is right around the time that Trump got elected, so a lot changed in those 2 years, for sure.
And then one thing to me that occupies my mind quite a bit is the progress of technology, which is something that you cover on the record a little bit as well. Because a song like Every Day, where did that start?
Every Day is definitely about the restlessness of modern dating. And I think it started for me when I was just realizing, that as much as I wanted to hold out for a soulmate or something, that it just wasn't gonna happen. So, the whole concept of that song is the idea of needing love every day, kind of, even if it's ADD, even if it doesn't last. But we're really not like our parents' generation in that sense. Everybody is kind of on their own path and spoiled for choice, and a lot of people are unwilling to forfeit their independence for a monogamous relationship. So it kind of really changes the whole scene.
And to me, one of the reasons why is because there's so much information around us, and there's so many screens in front of us. So it's difficult to kind of, like you say, the way our parents kind of interacted.
It's not simple.
Gone.
It's not simple. It's more complicated, and I think people really are spoiled for choice. There's this idea that you can always do better, or that somebody should be the answer to all your problems.
I wrote 2 lines down from that song. The one that's most pertinent, I suppose, then is "True love is making a comeback."
Yeah.
Do you really think?
For some people, yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of like a joke in terms of like the idea that that would be something that would need to have a comeback, True love is making a comeback because we're all getting so tired of Tinder and everything that we want some true love to come back and be more exciting than, this polyamorous, not true love or something. So that was really just a comment on kind of just, the way things are presented to us as like, once we become nostalgic for something, the pendulum swings the other way.
Thematically, it's quite interesting because, you look at movies and the way perhaps love is portrayed in movies. Mm-hmm. And for me, there's always been a distinction between. I've done the same. You kind of want that romantic view of love, but then the reality is oftentimes quite different.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
for you, how did you balance those two worlds?
In my life?
Well, both in the song and
well,
if you want to. Like.
I think I went through a phase when I was around 12 years old where I kind of was like, fuck movies. I didn't watch movies for like 3 years. I was so betrayed by how brainwashing and whitewashing they were that I needed a break from the movies because they had such a big emotional impact on me, and I knew that they weren't really going to fill that place as being like some kind of universal unifying myth of our times, even though that's what I wish they were, because I think that we all need myths and we all need stories that we all agree on to kind of create meaning out of our existence. So kind of realizing that movies were like a weird bastardized format of that, I was really bummed out and betrayed. But then I just got right back into them, and I think that I keep coming back to them as this, I'm just fascinated by them, and I don't think, as much as they don't really serve the purpose we wish they could, they still fill this void within all modern human beings. And that's the kind of storytelling, the myth void. And I think especially with romance, I think that that's kind of so blown out of proportion in film. And not film, I take that back, in movies. Because movies and film, it's like totally different. So yeah, I think that it's easy to feel betrayed and brainwashed. And it's rare that anybody can really express that, because it seems like such a trite, weird thing to express, because most people are like, oh yeah, like, don't take it that seriously, come on. But I mean, I couldn't help to take it seriously as like a 5-year-old, you know, just like consuming and believing in everything. And
especially if you don't really have a concept of what the world is like.
Exactly, if that's building your concept of what the world should be like, yeah. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize movies do.